A St. Louis area author travels to California to research the infamous Manson family. But his reason for going is rooted right here at home. We'll have that story next on City Corner. And welcome to City Corner. It's been over 40 years since the Manson family most famous case, the murder of pregnant actress Sharon Tate. Fred Pollard is a local author and blogger, and he's writing a book about that. Fred, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
What makes a guy from the St. Louis area interested in the Manson family?
Well, I actually have been interested in the case. I read the book when I was roughly 13. Because of my own personal background, I've always had.
We're going to get to later, and that's part of the reason. But
I've always had an interest in cult cases, things along those lines. So I read the book, and I was always just really intrigued with how someone could create a makeshift family and take seemingly normal kids and program them into doing things as heinous as killing people that they don't even know.
Well, there's certainly been a lot of books, I don't know how many, maybe you two, probably dozens, written about the Manson family, but you're approaching it at a little bit different angle, aren't you?
Yeah. Most of the books that have been written seem to focus on Charles Manson, which has helped create kind of this mythical cult figure, which is really not very accurate from what I've seen, the research I've done. My focus is more on my own experiences researching the case and also the former members of his group, where they are now, what happened to them in the years since, how they were able to move past the experiences that they had. So it's a little bit of a different take on something that I think has kind of been overdone.
I guess maybe we should do a little background, Fred, briefly for those people that might not be familiar with the case. You know, you think maybe everyone would be, but it was a long time ago. Mm-hmm. I know I was like 14, I think, so I still remember it pretty well. But the main crime, the Sharon Tate crime, was 1969, I believe.
Correct.
But so Charles Manson was a guy who attracted a following, and you set that up.
Mm-hmm. Charles Manson was an ex-convict. He had spent most of his life in prison up to the point where, when he arrived in Haight-Ashbury in the Summer of Love. And he basically just created his own little commune, which was no different than hundreds of other communes that were in California at the time. I think where the difference came in later on is that they were so isolated, and when you're isolated and under the leadership of someone who is a sociopath and has some other issues, there's really nobody standing around to say, hey, wait a minute, this is really weird, this is heading down a dark path. And that never happened, and it just spiraled and snowballed into what it eventually became, which was a series of murders. Yeah,
and it's what's interesting in your case is that you actually went out to California.
Yes, I did. The 40th anniversary of the murders was not last summer, but the summer before. And I traveled out there. I have a friend of mine who is a tour guide in Los Angeles, and he has a whole tour devoted to the Manson case, where they go to different locations, where the murders happened, things like that. So I traveled out there, and I took that tour and spent some time with him, and then also did some of my own research and started putting things together that eventually ended up being what hopefully is going to be a book real soon.
Let's look at some images that you were kind enough to bring. Let's look at 4 images to begin with. Okay. And you can tell us what we're looking at. The first, Charles Manson, then and now, sort of, right?
Yes, that's Charles Manson. The picture on the left is Charles Manson a couple of years ago. You can see he still has the swastika carved into his forehead. And then the younger picture, of course, is his Charles Manson around the times of the murders and the trials.
Let's go to the next one.
That is the Spahn Ranch in California.
What's left of it?
What's left of it, yeah. The buildings aren't there anymore, but that's where the family lived and where they were actually living when they killed Sharon Tate.
Next image, please.
That was the prosecutor, Vincent Bugliosi. He actually wrote the book Helter Skelter.
And the next.
And those are the three probably most famous family members. Those are the three that were convicted of the Tate LaBianca murders. That's Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten, all three of which are still in prison. I'm sorry, Susan Atkins passed away,
right,
but the other two are still in prison.
Well, Fred, what do we know about Charles Manson's early life?
He had a pretty dysfunctional early life. His mom was a prostitute. She lived with a succession of men, most of which physically or sexually abused Manson. He was kind of a unique figure in that throughout his childhood and young adulthood, he committed petty crimes, small-time crimes.
Robbed a lot of grocery stores, things like that?
Well, like forging checks, yeah, pimping, forced sodomy, things along those lines, but ended up being sentenced to incredibly overdone sentences. So that is how, basically, by the time he was 30, he had spent half his life in either prisons or boys' homes, reformatories, things along those lines, because he seemed to slip through the system as someone who committed minor offenses and received major maximum penalties for that.
Let's take a look at 4 more images related to the Manson family.
That is Bruce Davis. That is another member of the family that is currently in prison. I actually am in touch with him. He's assisting me with the book. That's just another family member. You can see the swastika carved in his forehead too. It's around the time of the trials. That's an image of Manson during the time of the trials. That is Dennis Wilson. He was the drummer for the Beach Boys, and the Manson family actually, before the murders, they actually lived with him for
Yeah, that's a fascinating
time.
story. Tell me if what I read is correct. He just happened to pick up hitchhiking a couple of the family members, a couple of the women, brought him back to his house for reasons I guess we can only guess, and ended up meeting Charles Manson after that, and they formed some sort of relationship. What was it?
Yeah. I think on Dennis Wilson's part, he saw the free love lifestyle, which he was attracted to. He was always kind of the wild beach boy. And he liked the women and the drugs. Manson saw an opportunity. He saw a way to get his music out there. Manson was a musician, and that was his ultimate goal.
That's what's hard to believe. And actually, some groups recorded music that he wrote.
Yes.
Now, I've never heard any of it. Have you?
The Beach Boys actually recorded one of his songs at the time, before the murders. They recorded one of his songs. And then since then, Guns N' Roses has done one of his songs. There are several other bands that have.
You know, when you think of Charles Manson, thinking that he wrote like a pop, upbeat song for the Beach Boys is really hard to believe.
Well, it sounds a lot different than, you listen to Charles Manson's demo version and you listen to the finished Beach Boys song, and it's quite different.
Was he talented?
Some people say yes, some people say no. He seemed, my personal opinion is that he was no better or worse than many of the other folk singers of the era that were out there, many of which, were successful. I don't think he was particularly good. I don't think he was particularly bad.
Yeah. Let's look at 4 more images. We're talking to Fred Pollard about a book that he's writing about Charles Manson, or about the family, really.
That is, during my trip to Los Angeles, that's Scott Michaels. He runs the Dearly Departed tours. And that was the day, I think that was the day that I took the Helter Skelter tour with him. That is Patricia Krenwinkel. She's one of the main Tate LaBianca killers. That's her at the time of the trials, and her in prison, more recent picture. That was Linda Kasabian. She was along the night of both the Tate and LaBianca murders. She actually turned state's evidence, testified against the family. She never actually killed anyone and was granted immunity. And that is the El Coyote Mexican restaurant in Los Angeles, which is actually where Sharon Tate went for dinner right before she was killed. So it's gained kind of a mythical status in Los Angeles. A lot of people like to go and try to speculate where Sharon Tate sat during her last meal.
Yeah, well, what was your experience like going there? Was it sort of, you're sort of obsessed with this case, if you don't mind me using that word. So I would think going there would be sort of eerie.
The restaurant, well, I was there. I was meeting a bunch of people that were there to kind of acknowledge the 40th anniversary of the murders. The Spawn Ranch was actually where it got very eerie for me. Just realizing where I was standing, you know, what had gone on there, who had been there. It was just a little unnerving. Plus, it's out in the middle of nowhere. It's very, very quiet.
Yeah. We have some film that you took that we're going to show later of the site of the ranch, which is something. We were looking at some of the family members. Now, Charles Manson himself was never even accused of killing anyone, was he?
He was complicit in one of the other murders, the murder of a ranch hand. He was actually present and basically directed the other family members what to do, how to kill him. But he was not along the night of the most famous murders, the Tate LaBianca murders. He sent the killers out, but he made sure he kept his hands clean.
Yeah. Did, oh, you also mentioned a guy, was his name Bruce? One
Bruce
of the family
Davis.
members that you've actually been in contact. What's that story? I mean, he's actually returned your correspondence.
Yes, yeah, we've actually been in touch. He and Leslie Van Houten are both unique cases to some extent. They both have been in prison for 40 years for participating in the murders. They both, neither one of them killed anyone. They both actually, at Manson's direction, they stabbed the bodies after they were dead. And the reasoning behind that was Manson wanted to make sure everyone involved got their hands dirty. So the argument that a lot of people have is that Leslie and Bruce should not still be in prison because they actually did not commit murders.
Yeah, and one of the real interesting things too is, and I guess this is just craziness, but from what I understand, part of the reason that Charles Manson orchestrated these murders had to do with what he saw as like race riots, or
yes, that's an ongoing controversy.
I don't get the connection, but
it's an ongoing controversy that's gone on for 40 years, and I don't think it's ever really going to be laid to rest. The prosecutor during the trials, the prosecutor said that the reasoning behind the murders was because Manson believed that it was his duty as the chosen prophet to start a race war between the blacks and the whites. Ultimately, he and the family would be the beneficiaries. They would end up being leaders of the world. Other family members have said that's not really the motivation behind the murders.
And there's also some speculation that his father, Manson's father, may have been African American, which makes it all more bizarre.
That's true.
Well, we're talking with Fred Pollard about a book he's writing on the Manson family, and we're going to take a break. We'll be back right after this.
What do you think of when you see a Shriner? Their unique red hats, their colorful parades? What about helping kids? Shriners Hospitals offer some of the world's best orthopedic, spinal cord, and burn medical care to children totally free of charge. And they combine that care with innovative teaching and progressive research programs. Sure, the Shriners have a lot of fun, but helping kids is a part of that fun. If you know a child that they could help, call this number. Shriners, having fun and helping kids.
More than half of the Earth's rainforests have been destroyed. The time to act is now. Go to the Arbor Day Foundation's website, arborday.org, and support rainforest rescue to protect the forests more precious than gold.
Mom, Jimmy's sick again.
You were always sick, too.
Not like him.
You don't remember.
He keeps getting infections.
He takes after you.
If your child is repeatedly sick, it may be PI, primary immunodeficiency disease, a defect of the immune system. The only way to know is by testing.
Mom, this isn't normal.
It's normal.
It's not normal. Talk to us about PI.
It's something we all agree on. It's something we all do. And this is how it's done. The USO depends entirely on the generosity of the American people. Help us support our troops until everyone comes home.
We'll stand by. I'm Steve Potter, and welcome back to City Corner. We're talking to local author and blogger Fred Pollard about a book that he's writing about the Manson family. And Fred, do you have a working title at this point, or what are your thoughts along those lines?
I've been kicking around a couple of ideas. The one I like the most right now is probably Legacy of the Haunted.
Where does that come from?
To me, it just seems to sum up the members of the family, including the ones that did not commit any of the crimes. They have a legacy that they continually have to be faced with, and their past haunts them, wherever they go, whatever they do. So.
Well, let's talk just a moment about you, if we may, before we get back to researching the book. We have some fascinating photos and some video to watch also. You work as a newspaper reporter. Mm-hmm. You're a reporter and the business manager for the Alton Telegraph.
Yes, yes. And for the Telegraph, and then I also have a blogging site at Freditorials, where I talk about retro pop culture, which is always something that has interested me. So.
What was one of your more interesting recent columns?
One that got
blogs,
a lot.
I guess you don't call them columns, do you?
One that got a lot of attention is where I compared the recent Walking Dead miniseries to the classic George Romero zombie movies. People seem to really, like that a lot. And then I also talked about the possibility of the discontinuation of Captain Crunch cereal, which that seemed to strike a nerve, and I got all kinds of feedback on that.
You mean they still make it?
They still make it.
Is it still as bad as it always was?
That's what started the whole controversy, is that it's supposedly the worst nutritional cereal for you. So.
How do you like blogging compared to writing? If you're writing a business story for the Telegraph, I guess it's sort of cut and dry, and blogging's a whole different thing.
Yes, to some extent it's cut and dry. I mean, I have a little bit of creative freedom with my writing, even, as a reporter, but with a blog it's different. You really get to be yourself. I think that's really the opportunity that people have to get to know who you are, and also to interact with you, so that I get to know more about what, my readers are like and what they like, don't like,
Do you find that people that respond to your blog are the same people that read you in print, or is it two different audiences?
Sometimes, yeah. It just depends. There are people that follow blogs that aren't not really interested in, the more newspapery aspect of things.
Back to the Manson family. Let's look at 4 more images
okay.
Related to the Manson family and the Charles Manson case, Fred, and you can tell us what we're looking at.
That's some members of the family during one of the trials. They would consistently disrupt the proceedings and try to make a mockery, basically, of the whole process.
And he instructed them, and he sent them secret messages, didn't he? While he was.
Yeah. They were so tight knit that he could ramble on, which he still does. He rambles on, and people think it's just gibberish. And he's actually a very bright man. He actually is able to communicate with people who are into his thing. And they can pick out little pieces of what he's saying and get the gist of a message that he's trying to get across. He doesn't want anybody else to know.
Let's look at these next 3 images.
That is Bobby Bouzoulet. He's another member of the family that's in prison for murder. I actually have corresponded with him as well. He is not able to work with me directly on my book, but he actually connected me with some really good research material. So.
Okay.
That's a picture of Sharon Tate. Of course, that's the most famous victim of the Manson family.
And she was pregnant at the time, stabbed, was it 17 times?
She was 8 months pregnant, stabbed 16 times. One of the common myths going around that seems to have a life of its own is that they took the baby out of the womb or stabbed the baby, and the baby was not touched.
Okay, got another one here.
That is actually the site of the Tate home. The actual building where she lived was torn down in '93, I believe. That is a building that was erected in its place. But that is the location where the Tate murders happened.
Okay, Fred, so that you've corresponded with 2 of the family members. What is that like? I got so many questions. Do they seem sane? Do they make sense?
Yeah.
Do they seem regretful? What do you get from them?
Most of the former family members, especially the ones in prison, it seemed that they swung from one end of the pendulum to the other. A lot of them found Christianity shortly after being in prison, and the ones in prison have spent the majority of their lives doing a lot of work with kids, a lot of drug program type things. One former family member who was never in prison, he actually did a lot of touring of college campuses, talking about the dangers of cults, the dangers of drugs. So they seemed to kind of go to the other extreme.
Can we blame the drugs for the violence? I mean, do you think the fact that they're under the influence of maybe heavy drugs, is that what impaired their judgment, or was it more?
I believe that when you couple hallucinogenic drugs with an outside influence that's a negative influence, I think that the drugs can be a factor in allowing people to do things they would not normally do. Yeah, I think that drugs were a factor. I don't think they were the factor, and I don't think I think it's naive to blame it on the drugs or the hippie culture.
Mm-hmm. Let's look at the 3 more images involving the Charles Manson and the Manson family. We're talking with Fred Pollard, who's writing a book about the whole thing.
That is Tex Watson. He is the member of the Manson family. Is probably the most notorious, as he was the main killer of the Tate LaBianca victims.
And of all of them, he looks the most clean cut. And
he was, before he was in the family, he was an all-American athlete, a good student in school, voted most likely to succeed.
Really?
Many of them were, you know, in that position before they hooked up with Charles Manson. Okay. That is a home on Venice Beach where another, some people say murder, some people say suicide, a family member was actually shot in the head in that home. And several family members were present, and of course, when the police got there, they all had the same story and stuck to it, that he was playing Russian roulette, even though the gun was fully loaded.
I think we've got one more. Yeah.
And that is another building in Venice. It's actually one of the pagan religious buildings that pop up, you know, in Venice quite often. And Manson was affiliated with the people that were involved in some satanic activity in that building.
So the two most famous murders that the family is responsible for is the Sharon Tate and the LaBiancas. Mm-hmm. Now, there were other people at that house, Sharon Tate's house. Of course, she was married to, or maybe not married, but her...
Yeah, they were married. Roman
Polanski, the director. He was not there that evening, but
No.
some other people were.
Yes. Her former boyfriend, Jay Sebring, who was a men's hairstylist, he was there, and then 2 of their friends, Abigail Folger, who was the heiress to the Folger Coffee Company, and her boyfriend, Wojciech Frykowski.
And they were all murdered.
They were all murdered.
And the LaBiancas were who?
The LaBiancas were just a couple, an average everyday couple that lived in the Los Angeles area. He owned grocery stores, and their house was more or less picked at random.
Hmm. Well, we have some video we're going to watch here. Now, this is the ranch. Span, am I pronouncing it?
Spawn Ranch.
Spawn Ranch. Mm-hmm. And originally, it was, what, a movie set?
Yeah, it was a movie set. It was used a lot in old episodes of, you know, Bonanza, Ponderosa, trying to think of some of the other ones. There were several TV shows that would use the set as their backdrop.
So there were all these buildings, and I think they were sort of run down, and so
yeah,
the
over time
family just began to rent them, I guess?
Well, the owner of the buildings he basically, at that point, he was mostly making money by having horseback riding there.
Okay. Let's go to that video, Fred. Now, this is video, we're going to hear you talking. This is video that you took. Now, the buildings aren't there anymore, but you went to the actual site. Mm-hmm. And you're holding the camera and you're talking, and so why don't we just take a look at that now?
Walk them down to the site of the Spawn Ranch. It is definitely very quiet and very eerie here. Quiet except for a gardener mowing the lawn of the church property. Pretty overgrown here. I'm looking for a place that's not quite so grown over. And here we go. This is the Spawn Ranch, where, as Scott Michaels so eloquently puts it, all the crazy went down. Pretty wild to be here. Didn't think I'd actually ever get to see this place for real. I think I'm right about where the buildings were. Right around here. If I think if I'm in the right spot, right around here is where the gun room was, where Manson sent the killers out. Pretty wild.
Pretty wild? Understatement?
Yeah.
Now those buildings are gone and the house where Sharon Tate was murdered is gone. Were they turned down because of the murders? Or?
The Spawn Ranch, actually there was a fire and it burned to the ground in 1970. The Tate home, Trent Reznor from Nine Inch Nails actually rented that house. That's where he recorded the Downward Spiral. And then shortly after that, the house was sold and it was torn down to build a new building there.
Okay, here's what's interesting. The reason that you did this whole book, the reason that you have interest in it, there's a connection. I mentioned this at I hinted at it at the beginning, and that is?
I was raised in a religious cult myself, nonviolent. It was not anything like the Manson family.
And it was in this area.
Yes,
leave it
was
at that.
in this area, yeah. And it's just kind of, I think I was able to relate to some of the former family members a little easier because I had gone through, in some ways, similar experiences.
And that's why your book's focusing on the family members, because it's sort of the experience you went through. Of course, as you say, yours was not violent. How long were you in the cult that you were in? And it was a whole family thing with your parents and other relatives, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, most of my family was involved. I was actually, I think, the first one to leave. I was about 16, but I was born into the group, yeah.
Was that hard for you to leave, either emotionally or for other reasons?
At the time, it was not hard to leave. The lasting impressions and the doubts that you have about if you left something that you should not have left, that goes on for a long, long time. It takes a long time to get that process kind of worked out in your head.
And eventually, much later, the rest of your family sort of drifted away from the cult as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah, they're all out of it now, so I'm happy to say.
Is that something you talk about with them? Or?
Yeah, somewhat. It's not really a taboo subject, but it's not really something that we need to talk about a lot either. It's just something in the past.
All right. Well, any thoughts of when your book's going to come out? I know you're still working through it, but
yeah, I'm hoping within a year to a year and a half to have the book completed and to be able to have a target date set.
Well, Fred Pollard, thank you so much for sharing this story about not your own personal story about being in a cult and this fascinating research that you've done on the Manson family. It's been fun talking to you about it.
All right, thank you.
That's all the time we have for this edition of City Corner. I'm Steve Potter. Thanks for watching, and please join us again next time. Bye.